For generations, a powerful narrative has been repeated across the world that Africa has always been poor, undeveloped, and dependent on others for survival. But what if that story isn't true? What if the image of Africa that many people see today tells only a small part of a much larger story? Long before the arrival of European colonial powers, Africa was home to some of the world's richest kingdoms, busiest trade routes, greatest scholars, and most valuable natural resources. The gold that fueled economies across Europe often came from African lands. Ancient cities flourished as centers of learning, commerce, and innovation. Empires rose and fell, controlling vast territories and generating immense wealth. So if Africa possessed such extraordinary riches, what happened? How did a continent blessed with gold, diamonds, fertile land, oil, strategic trade routes, and one of the youngest populations on Earth become associated with poverty and dependence? Was colonization solely responsible? Or are there deeper factors that continue to shape Africa's present reality? In this video, we will explore Africa's forgotten wealth, the impact of the colonial era, the choices made after independence, and the challenges that still affect many African nations today. This is not a story of victimhood. It is a story of history, power, leadership, resilience, and untapped potential. Because to understand Africa's future, we must first understand what happened to its past. Welcome to Africa Unforgotten. To understand what happened to Africa, we must first understand what Africa once was. Long before European ships appeared on African shores, powerful kingdoms and empires were already thriving across the continent. In West Africa, vast empires such as Ghana, Mali, and Songhai controlled some of the most valuable trade routes on Earth. Gold, salt, ivory, textiles, and other goods moved across deserts and kingdoms, connecting Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe. The wealth of these empires was so immense that stories of African gold spread across continents. One ruler in particular became legendary. Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali, is often described as one of the wealthiest individuals in human history. During his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century, he distributed so much gold along his journey that its value reportedly declined in several cities for years afterward. But Africa's wealth was never limited to gold. Across the continent were thriving centers of agriculture, commerce, metallurgy, architecture, and scholarship. Cities such as Timbuktu became renowned centers of learning, attracting scholars from distant lands. Ancient universities preserved thousands of manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, and philosophy. Meanwhile, kingdoms in Central, Southern, and Eastern Africa developed sophisticated political systems, trade networks, and industries of their own. Africa was not isolated. Africa was connected. Africa was producing. Africa was trading. Africa was building. The image of Africa as a continent without history or civilization is simply not supported by the historical record. Yet despite this immense wealth and potential, forces were already beginning to emerge that would dramatically alter the continent's future. And those forces would intensify with the arrival of European powers seeking access to Africa's land, labor, and resources. By the late 19th century, European powers had turned their attention toward Africa. What followed would become known as the Scramble for Africa. Within a remarkably short period, most of the continent was divided among foreign powers, often with little regard for existing kingdoms, ethnic groups, languages, or historical boundaries. Lines were drawn on maps. Communities that had lived separately for centuries were merged together. Others that shared common identities were divided by newly created borders. But perhaps the most significant change was economic. Before colonization, many African societies produced goods primarily for local use and regional trade. Under colonial rule, economies were increasingly redesigned to serve the needs of distant empires. Railways were built, roads were constructed, ports were expanded. Yet these developments were often designed for one primary purpose: moving raw materials out of Africa: gold, copper, rubber, cocoa, palm oil, diamonds, and later oil. The goal was rarely to develop diversified local industries. Instead, many colonies became suppliers of raw materials, while finished products were manufactured elsewhere. As a result, wealth frequently flowed outward, rather than remaining within local economies. Over time, this created a pattern that would continue long after colonial rule ended. Many African countries became heavily dependent on exporting raw resources while importing expensive manufactured goods, a structure that left them vulnerable to global market fluctuations and external influence. But colonialism was not only about economics. Traditional systems of governance were disrupted. Local institutions weakened. In many regions, power became concentrated in ways that created tensions that would survive into the modern era. When independence movements finally gained momentum during the 20th century, millions of Africans dreamed of a different future. A future where the continent's wealth would finally benefit its own people. A future where freedom would lead to prosperity. And for a brief moment, that dream seemed within reach. But independence would bring challenges few had anticipated. Across Africa, celebrations erupted as nation after nation gained independence. Flags were raised, national anthems were sung. A new generation of leaders promised development, dignity, and self-determination. The colonial era was ending. The future appeared bright. Many countries inherited vast natural resources. Oil fields, mineral deposits, fertile farmland, growing populations, and immense potential. Yet, building prosperous nations proved more difficult than winning independence. Some governments faced enormous obstacles from the very beginning. Weak institutions, ethnic tensions, external interference, debt burdens, and economies still depended on exporting raw materials. But these challenges alone cannot explain everything. In many countries, another problem emerged: corruption. Money intended for schools disappeared. Funds allocated for hospitals vanished. Infrastructure projects were announced but never completed. Public resources often found their way into private bank accounts, while ordinary citizens struggled with unemployment, poor health care, inadequate education, and rising costs of living. Some political elites accumulated extraordinary wealth. The tragedy was not that Africa lacked resources. The tragedy was that in many places, the benefits of those resources failed to reach the people who needed them most. This uncomfortable reality is one of the most important parts of Africa's story, because blaming only foreign actors ignores the responsibility of leaders who mismanaged public wealth. At the same time, blaming only African leaders ignores the historical systems and international pressures that shaped the continent's development. The truth lies somewhere in between. Africa's challenges are the result of many forces interacting across generations. History, politics, economics, leadership, global trade, and human choices. Understanding that complexity is essential if real solutions are ever to be found. Today, Africa remains one of the most resource-rich regions on Earth. Beneath its soil lie vast reserves of gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, copper, uranium, natural gas, and oil. Its rivers possess enormous hydroelectric potential. Its lands contain some of the world's most fertile agricultural regions. Its population is young, energetic, and rapidly growing. By every measure, Africa should be one of the most prosperous regions in the world. Yet millions of Africans continue to face poverty, unemployment, inadequate healthcare, and limited educational opportunities. How can a continent so rich contain so many people struggling to survive? Part of the answer lies in the way wealth is distributed. In many countries, natural resources generate billions of dollars in revenue. But the benefits are often concentrated among a small group of political elites, powerful corporations, and influential interests. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens see little improvement in their daily lives. In some communities, valuable minerals are extracted from the ground, while nearby villages lack clean water. Oil is exported to international markets, while local roads remain broken. Billions are earned, but too little is invested in the people. Another challenge is economic dependency. Many African nations still export raw materials and import finished products. A country may export cocoa beans but import expensive chocolate, export crude oil but import refined fuel, export minerals but import manufactured electronics. As a result, much of the value created from African resources is captured elsewhere. The continent often sells what is cheap and buys back what is expensive. Debt has also become a major concern. Governments borrow money to fund development projects, infrastructure, and public services. When managed responsibly, borrowing can help a nation grow. But when debt becomes excessive or poorly managed, future generations are forced to carry the burden. Then there is the challenge of governance. No nation can achieve sustainable prosperity without strong institutions, accountability, and the rule of law. Where corruption flourishes, development suffers. Where public funds are stolen, hospitals remain unfinished, schools deteriorate, businesses struggle, and citizens lose trust in their leaders. Yet this is not the entire story, because despite the challenges, another Africa is emerging. Across the continent, entrepreneurs are building businesses. Young innovators are creating technology solutions. Farmers are increasing productivity. Scientists are conducting groundbreaking research. Artists, filmmakers, and creators are telling African stories to global audiences. A new generation is beginning to challenge old assumptions about what Africa can become. The future of Africa is not being written solely by politicians. It is being written by millions of ordinary Africans who refuse to accept that poverty is their destiny. For too long, conversations about Africa have focused almost exclusively on what went wrong. The slave trade, colonialism, conflict, corruption, poverty. These chapters are real. They matter. They must be understood. But they are not the entire story. History explains where a people have been. It does not determine where they must go. The truth is that Africa's greatest resource has never been its gold, or its diamonds, or its oil. Its greatest resource has always been its people. The inventors, the farmers, the teachers, the entrepreneurs, the scientists, the dreamers, the builders. No continent with such vast human potential is destined for failure. The question facing Africa today is not whether it possesses wealth. The question is whether that wealth can be transformed into lasting prosperity for future generations. Can leaders place public service above personal gain? Can institutions become stronger than individuals? Can industries be built instead of merely exporting raw resources? Can education, innovation, and accountability become national priorities? The answers to these questions will shape the next chapter of Africa's story. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: Africa was never poor. Its history proves that. Its resources prove that. Its people prove that. What Africa needs is not charity. It needs opportunity. It needs vision. It needs leadership. And above all, it needs the courage to learn from the past while building something greater for the future. Because the story of Africa is not over. In many ways, it is only just beginning. This is Africa Unforgotten.